How many of you would say that as you look out over the next several years, you think, notwithstanding the fact that demand has gone up, it's going to go up still further? How many feel that? Right. So here's the $64,000 question. If demand has been increasing over the last several years, and you believe it's going to continue to increase, how many of you believe that your capacity to meet that demand will rise on a straight line along with the demand? Okay, I don't always get a laugh for that. I usually get a very pregnant silence, but good. Yes, so you got it, right? We've got Houston, there's a problem. Dallas, there's a problem. Your demand is going up, but capacity does not follow. What's the ordinary way that we, and why would that happen? Why would that occur? Why would we not consider that a crisis? Well, the answer is because we take capacity for granted. We assume there'll always be more where that came from because there always has been more where that came from. It's the same thing with our natural resources. I want them, so therefore they're available. Well, the problem is that there is a limit, and the way we have individually and organizationally addressed that issue up until this period, when we have more to do, what's the external resource we invest more of? What do you invest more of when you've got more to do? Time. Exactly, time. It's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing, and therefore you get more done. There is a small problem with time, isn't there? It's finite. There are 24 hours a day. There are 168 hours in a week. There are never going to be any more. No government legislation is ever going to change that immutable fact. No government legislation is ever going to change any immutable fact. But that's a separate story, post-election night. So the problem with time is you don't have any more. Your dance cards are full, and past a certain point, time is no longer a benefit. Any strength overused eventually becomes a liability. So if you invest too much time, you actually get collateral damage at a certain point. And we know that a good percentage of people in America, now work, whether they're working one job or two jobs, but now work 50, sometimes 60, and occasionally even 70 hours a week. That's not a viable, sustainable way to work. So what do we do about this? What is the solution to what appears to be an impossible problem? Well, we believe that the answer is energy. Energy is the capacity to do work. I should have had that slide first. But energy is the capacity to do work. So if you have more energy, you have more capacity. Capacity, what's that? I've been talking about it, but I haven't said what it is. Well, it's the fuel in your tank, isn't it? It's what makes it possible for you to bring your skill and your talent, or the skill and the talent of those you oversee, to life in the crucible of this demand. That's what capacity is, and the value of energy, which I now can't go back and show you because I don't really know how you go backwards with this thing. But I can tell you, the value of energy is that, unlike time, it can be renewed. You can refuel your energy. It can be expanded. You can't get more time, but you can get more energy. You can convert, just technically, one kind of energy into another so that you have more energy. You can push against resistance and build your biceps so long as you build in intermittent renewal. So energy is a remarkable capacity for you to be able to develop. But in order to develop it, you have to understand it. You have to recognize it, because this is something inside you. Time is outside you, goes past you like a train off into the night. But energy is something inside you. And in organizations, we haven't spent a lot of time thinking about the role that is played by what's going on inside us. It's messy, it's subjective, it's stuff you're supposed to leave at the door when you get to work in the morning. But the problem is that it influences how we show up in the world. So, there you go. So if you have a stove or a computer or a light, you need one source of energy to fuel that thing. But human beings are complex. We need 4 sources of energy. None of them are sufficient by themselves. Each of them is critical, and they all influence one another. So what are they? Well, the first one is physical. Physical energy is the one that's very concrete. You know what that is. There are 4 components to physical energy. 3 of them you know. What's the first key component of physical energy? Exercise. Okay, that's one. The ability to transport oxygen through your body. What's another? Sleep. That's the most fundamental one, because absent sleep, nothing else is possible. Amnesty International called sleep deprivation a form of torture. You can go longer without eating than you can go without sleeping. What's the third, speaking of eating? Eating. Okay, good. So eating, nutrition, that's the ability to stabilize your blood sugar. That's what's critical from an energy perspective. And then finally, there's one more source of energy that's physical. What is it? Now, the reason you don't know it is because you don't do it. And the reason you don't do it is because you don't think it's good for you. It's called rest. You once did it when you were 5 and you had a teddy bear and it was time for you to take a little nap, but you've not done it since then. Some of you believe it's actually illegal, that it's a felony, that you can be arrested for rest. But what we know from the work we've done at the Energy Project, going back 25 years, it started with professional athletes. And they would come to us in the dark of night. They didn't want anybody to know that they were doing something that was kind of shady or at least psychological. And they would come to us because technical solutions to their problems weren't working, and we would interpret it through the lens of energy. And what we learned is that if you skillfully manage your energy, you can actually get more done in less time at a higher level of quality in a more sustainable way. It's a wonderful promise. So what does this actually look like in practice? Well, here's the key. It turns out that there's only one way you can feel to perform at your best. Only one way, and we don't always feel that way. What is that way? It's the way you feel when you're performing at your best. So what is that? Tell me some adjectives. How do you feel when you're performing at your best? Inspired, engaged, motivated, confident, accomplished, energized. You get the idea. There are a very particular set of adjectives that define how you perform when you're at your best. But it's not the only way we feel across a day. We have 4 different ways that we feel that create what we call these energy quadrants. And each of them has a different role that it plays in our lives. And so let's take a look at them. The vertical axis is the quantity of your energy from high to low. The horizontal axis is the quality of your energy from negative to positive. So which quadrant do you think is the one you perform best in? High positive, without any question. Anytime you're not feeling that set of adjectives you just defined, you are suboptimal as a performer and you're suboptimal as a leader, which is not a big piece of news. You came up with those adjectives, so does everybody who's asked that question. Here's the news. When you're not feeling that way, you're not okay. You're not capable of doing what you are capable of doing at your best. So not surprisingly, we call that upper right zone the performance zone. It's obvious what that means for athletes, but we found it's just as applicable to you. This is where you need to be, and when you're here, great things happen. The problem is, you're not always here. So where are you most frequently when you're not in this zone? Well, I'm going to tell you because I only have probably 15 minutes left, so I can't have a leisurely conversation about it. The place you are most frequently is what we call the survival zone. That's high negative. And the reason, by the way, that the survival zone is where you are most frequently is because it's the one other zone with a significant amount of energy. And in order for you to perform well, you need enough energy. Why do you move into the survival zone? Well, first of all, understand this. By the way, do those adjectives feel familiar to you about your work experience? Or is it mostly joy and rapture? These are very common feelings at work. It turns out they serve you very poorly at work, but it doesn't change the fact that you feel them. So when do you drop into the survival zone? Well, the first answer is you drop into the survival zone. You fall into the survival zone. You never choose it. Nobody sits there and goes, you know what, right now I'm going to move judiciously into rage. You know what, I'm thinking, I noticed that looks a little scary, so I'm going to go to fear. No, it is a reactive state. It's an automatic state. You've had other speakers talking about fight or flight before me, and that's what this zone is. That separation of the adjectives that you see there, the left side ones are the fight adjectives, the right side ones are the flight adjectives. And when does it serve you well? Because every one of these zones is useful under certain circumstances. When does it serve you well to be in the performance zone? When there's a survival threat, when there's a lion coming at you. Here's the problem. The body makes no distinction between a lion and a bad boss, a lion and a kid who causes problems for you when you're trying to get out of your house in the morning, a lion and any other experience of threat. And here's what happens in the fight or flight zone that serves you well if it's a lion. Your prefrontal cortex shuts down. You're no longer able to think. Before that even happens, your vision narrows to the threat itself. So now you're looking at whatever that threat is, your kid or the lion or whatever it is, and you're saying to yourself, if you're in this room, there's no exit from this room. I can't get out of here. You take one deep breath, 2 steps back, and you suddenly go, oh, well, there's 4 exit doors here. So the point is that when you move into fight or flight, your options narrow, your vision narrows, your capacity for creativity narrows, and if you move further into the survival zone, you literally have the prefrontal cortex shut down. You no longer can think. How many of you, be honest here, how many of you have a job that requires that you think? Okay, so about 3/4 of you do. So for you, it's important. If you spend too long in the survival zone, you end up in the burnout zone, low negative. This is the worst place from which to perform, and it's a national crisis now. The World Health Organization called it a common workplace condition now, and this experience of simply being depleted. You feel it physically in depletion and fatigue. You feel it emotionally in depression and sadness, helplessness. And so what we've got here is a very, very big problem if, in fact, you or people in your organization are spending significant amounts of time in either of these zones. How many of you would say that people in your organization, on average, spend more than 25% of the time in one of those 2 zones? How many would agree with that? And I'll tell you, the ones who are not raising their hands are just very, very optimistic. Because people spend enormous amounts of time here, not only because of demand, but because of the climate we're living in. The feeling of stress, the feeling of overwhelm, the feeling of political polarization. And I'm not taking any perspective on this. I'm just saying this is a tough time. So what's the antidote to this? What is the solution to this crisis? And it is countercultural and counterintuitive. The answer is low positive. That's what I said about rest, the renewal zone. The renewal zone, how many of you would say that you frequently feel tranquil, serene, mellow, carefree, and peaceful over the course of a day? But guess what? If you were taking money out of a bank account and spending it and spending it and spending it, it would not surprise you that at a certain point you'd have nothing left. And yet we don't think that renewal and rest and recovery are as important to our performance as is the expenditure of energy. Quite to the contrary, we confuse the lower right zone, this notion of renewal, which we know from athletes is critical to high performance, we confuse it with slacking. And organizations confuse it with slacking, with being lazy, with the likelihood of failure. Oh, look, I can't do that right now because I don't have enough time to do that. Well, we're not talking about time. We're talking about energy. What makes it possible for you to get work done is not how long you spend at it. You can sit and stare at a screen for 10 hours and get nothing done. It's how much energy you're able to invest during the time you're doing it. And that's where if you do more, you can get more done in less time if you're skillful about moving rhythmically, deliberately, intentionally between these two zones. That is a cultural transformation in 98% of organizations in this country, in the world. It's a mindset shift. You know, we've been teaching these principles for 16 years, and everybody, I mean everybody, intellectually gets it. It makes sense in a minute. You don't have to be that bright to understand that you need to refuel a tank when you've burned it down. But that mindset, that fear, that underlying cultural sense that this is the way we do things stands in the way. But what got us here is not going to get us where we need to go in a world of infinitely rising demand and relentless complexity. So here's the bottom line. We have a misapprehension. Human beings are not designed to operate like computers. How do computers operate? At high speeds, continuously, for long periods of time, running multiple programs at the same time. That's a computer. We've confused ourselves. We think we're supposed to chase those computers that once upon a time we thought were actually going to make life better for us. What's the truth about human beings? The truth about human beings is that everything in our body pulses. So this idea of spending and recovering energy is built deeply into our physiology. The heart rate, when you are under pressure, is meant to rise. When the pressure gets lower, you're supposed to have that heart rate go back down. Your brain is meant to have fire at a high level, a high electrical level, when you are fully engaged, and then to go into a lower level of electrical activity when you're not. Your muscles are meant to contract and relax. We are designed to be oscillatory beings, but we live like flatliners. So the mindset shift here that I'm talking about is that in order for you to perform at your best, you have to learn to balance the expenditure of your energy with the renewal of your energy. And that's a shift that not only involves understanding the facts about how your body works, but also understanding your set of assumptions and beliefs that stand in the way of your doing something that would serve you better. We have something we call the Resilience Boot Camp. This is something we added to our ordinary workshops about a year ago that happened to us because we went into Ernst Young and I'm going to go a couple minutes over because I know I'm the last person. But this is important to share with you. We went into Ernst Young where we've worked for many years, and during busy season, during the tax season from January to April, those folks are on average, the line people, working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's almost unsustainable. We went and did a pilot back in January with a group of 40 people in a particular team serving a client that was itself in trouble, and this team was under siege. The previous busy seasons, this is 2019, that was 2018, 15 out of those 40 people quit at the end of the busy season because they were so burned out and exhausted. They wanted us to help. We came in and we built not just a one-day experience around some of the ideas that I've shared with you in these last 15 minutes, but a process afterward in which we met with those people together in cohorts of 6 or 7 over a period of 12 weeks. Every other week, we would bring together these cohorts of 6 or 7 people, and we would take them through a process that involved support for each other, accountability, sharing best practices, building a kind of cultural fortress, building a cultural wave that would allow people to not feel guilty or afraid if they tested their assumption that building more renewal under higher demand would actually serve them well. So what happened? Well, first of all, they all agreed to do these 4 behaviors throughout the busy season. Sleep at least 7 hours, because 97.5% of all human beings require at least 7 hours of sleep in order to feel fully rested. 2.5% of us don't need 7 hours. That means there's 2 people in this room who don't, and the rest of us do. How many of you had less than 5 days of 7 hours of sleep over the last week? 5 nights, fewer than 5 nights. So a good percentage of you, a lot more than 2.5%. Do the most important thing first. Why? Because you have the most energy in the morning, and you have, for most people, and you have the fewest distractions. So that's an opportunity to get way more done in way less time. Third, take a break every 90 minutes. An ideal break would be a minimum of 5 minutes, during which you change channels. That could be physical activity, it could be taking a walk if you're sitting, but it could also be reading a book, it could be calling a loved one at home, but it's something that allows you to refuel the tank in one of those 4 dimensions. And then if you can't get 5 minutes, then we say, well, don't then say, I can't do it. Breathe for 1 minute. In 3 through your nose, out 6 through your mouth for 1 minute. When you get good at that, you can completely clear the bloodstream of cortisol in 1 minute. It's not the length of time that you renew that matters so much, it's the quality of your renewal. And then finally, pick a time in the evening when you fully disconnect from your digital devices. Just like chocolate, if they're around you, you're going to eat them, or you're going to look at them. So when's the point at which you put that device down and you give yourself a break? We get organizations to make this commitment, but it also is individual. So we did all 4 of those practices. What happened? At the end of the busy season, which was in April, and now it's November, so it's another 3 or 4 months, 1 person has left. 15 last year, 1 person this year. Pretty remarkable. Second thing that happened, they radically reduced the number of hours they were working and got the same amount of work done. They completely cut out 1 day a week of work, Sundays. How extraordinary not to work on Sunday. They cut that work day of the week out of their schedules altogether because they were getting so much more done, because they were regularly refueling and because they were doing the most important thing first, and they were leaving, on average, an hour and a half earlier every evening when they were working. Those are remarkable results. In fact, I've written about them in a Harvard Business Review piece. Anybody who would like that piece, give me your card and I'll send you that piece. So what do I want to leave you with? Because I'm 2 minutes over already. I want to leave you with the notion, with the visual idea of a paradigm shift. Right now, most of you are living the life of a marathoner. You're coming up to the line, you're looking down off into the distance, and you're saying, there's no finish line in sight. So instead of fully engaging, in order to survive, you know how to conserve your energy. You never fully engage, because imagine, in a marathon, if you went out of the starting gate in a full sprint for 100 or 200 yards, you'd drop at the end of that period and you'd never finish the race. So it's not that you're not in a marathon. It's not that the finish line is way off in the distance. We want it to be. I'm not trying to get you to the finish line here. But it's inside that finish line that the paradigm shift occurs. Look, that marathoner walks up to the line, looks out, and realizes that he or she must conserve energy along the way. The sprinter, by contrast, comes up to the line, looks down the track, says, can I fully engage in this activity for the entire 100 yards, or 200 yards, or 400 yards? In other words, the finite distance that I set myself, and the sprinter says, yes, I can. In fact, I can do it with little breaks afterward, renewal breaks, 5, 6, 8 times a day. What if you started to think of your day that way? When you're engaged, you're fully engaged. When you are recovering and renewing, you are truly relaxing and refueling the system. You stop living in the gray zone in between. You take back your life because it belongs to you. Thanks.
Tony. That was terrific. I'm Steve, and I'm ready to release you into the tranquility zone any second now, but allow me to say a couple closing remarks. One thing was that there were some amazing quotes and remarks up here that I hope we will remember a long time. We talked a lot about diversity and inclusion, and one of the most striking things that one woman said was, if women and people of color could fix this themselves, they would have done it 200 years ago. We need to help leaders understand what their role is. The other thing I appreciated too was a lot of HR people not speaking in HR talk. One gentleman said in talking about retention issues, he said, we've got a hole in the bucket. And another one was that he mentioned around hereism, which apparently is when people say, that's how we've always done things around here. But my favorite remark was at the end when I was getting toward later in the day, getting some iced tea with an executive from a giant insurance company, and she said it was so great to be able to drive from downtown to here for a one-day-only conference. She called it a professional staycation. And I thought, and I added quickly, with content. And she appreciated that. So I hope you enjoyed the content today here. Thanks for coming, and it's really great to have met so many of you. Thanks.